Favorite lobbyist.
Where'd you go, Randy? As long as there are no others around.
That's right.
Despite missing one member, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. It's July 27, 2023. It's 11:03 a.m. And this meeting is a work session, a briefing with our state lobbyist, Wendy Chamberlain of Legislative Consultants. And first, we will go around and do member introductions.
George Martinez.
Karen Bronga,
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley,
Christopher Constant.
Kevin Cross.
Wendy Chamberlain.
We also have at the table Mr. Byrd, Chief of Staff, Ms. Costello, Legislative Staff for the Mayor, and Assembly Counsel Dean Gates. Fine. And I know Mr. Salt is around. Ms. Zalatel just walked into the room. And so we are glad to welcome you, Wendy, to this work session. It's been a long-held desire to more effectively liaise with you as our lobbyist. And we're working also with a federal lobbyist who we hope to be having a similar conversation with about their efforts. And we look forward to regular reporting. And we are reinvigorating our legislative committee. Historically, the legislative committee has focused strictly on a legislative program, which is kind of a point in time. But we're going to broaden that effort. And to that end, we have made Member Brawley the chair of that committee. And I will be happy briefly to turn the microphone over to her before we hear from Ms. Chamberlain.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one bit of notice. We will be meeting as the Legislative Committee on next Thursday, a week from today, August 3rd at 11 a.m. In this room. And I am excited to really think about how we can meaningfully engage, not just as the Assembly, but with the administration, make sure that we have unified priorities and that we're really working to ensure that Anchorage's priorities and needs are being heard and represented in Juneau. So we're working to build relationships with our Anchorage caucus and with our legislative folks at the state level, working to advocate at the state and federal level for our needs. And then again, want to make sure that we're really being effective in what we do. And so that's part of the goal for today, is to learn from our lobbyist, Wendy Chamberlain, who's been working for a long time with the municipality, kind of hear what happened during session in this past year, and then what we're looking ahead to in 2024. And then I'll also invite, I know currently the committee is not a committee of the whole, but I do want to invite all members, and of course members of the public as well, to participate in that. And then you'll see on the table just 2 documents. We won't go through those in detail today, but they are memos that were produced by our staff looking at bills and funding issues that we believe the municipality should be keeping an eye on behalf of Anchorage. And so I would also encourage members, if there's items that you would like to discuss or have questions on or think that we should be paying attention to, please feel free to bring those up either today or in our meeting next week. So more to come there, but with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Member Riley and Member Constance. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here to meet. I'm honored to, do I keep the finger down?
If you hit the button, it'll turn green.
Okay. I'm honored to be here and to meet with you all and to give you an update on the session. I see some new faces that probably don't know me. First of all, I usually don't look like this, but I got an infection in my eye, bug bite, and had to go to the ER. And yes, it's probably not my greatest look today, but it does get better. Okay. Our firm has represented the Muni. We started with George Walsh years ago. For those who don't know, we did 6 years with Mayor Begich. We did Mayor Sullivan. Did a little stint with Matt Clamian when he was interim mayor. We had Ethan Berkowitz, and now we're with the current mayor. I want to just say one thing following up on Member Burley's comment. The last 2 years have been great for Anchorage caucus. Seen a real strong move on the Anchorage caucus. And we had a few years there where we had several years where Anchorage caucus was really strong, and then we kind of lost interest, or the members lost interest. We couldn't get them together. They had different priorities and that. And then along comes Anchorage Port the last 2 years, and working with the Assembly, the Mayor's office, and the legislature. I mean, it was a delight to work on these projects. So I just wanted to let you know that your help in these presentations to give, where we talk back and forth, are really, really helpful. To give you a look at the session, the governor put out his budget. And the projected revenue was $81 a barrel. And I always do a barrel because always I've remembered for years, $1 fluctuation in the price of oil is a gain or a loss to the state of 90 million. So if they say we lost $5 a barrel, 5 nines, that's how much revenue we lost. So I try and keep it relative because otherwise the numbers are so huge. So he balanced it. The revenue forecast 81, the governor comes out with the full PFD and it needs $86 a barrel to balance. So how did he do the deficit? He went in and did some ARPA funds. He took the some forward funding education money. He did a draw from the CBR and he did a draw from the SDR. But basically that included the full dividend, pretty fully funded operating budget, no increase in education, and it also didn't have much capital in it. Now we go forward to this one here. The revenue forecast comes out. So as you know, they put out a forecast December, and that's the fall forecast November, and he does his new budget on that. And then they adjust the budget again in March, depending on what the revenue forecast is. And along comes March, and ouch, now we're down to $73 per barrel oil. We've just lost $8 a barrel oil. We now have 680 million less revenue than when we started. So obvious to say now, sitting at March, the budget's looking very, very different. However, at the end of the day, the legislature passed a budget with a $90 million surplus. How did they do that? Here was the difference in the two budgets. The full statutory dividend that the governor put out, $3,800, costs $2.4 billion. The legislature said, no, we're going to support a 75-25, 25% of the earnings reserve or the POMB, and that's $900 million, $1,304. So that's what the dividend will be this year. So as you can see, they picked up quite a bit of money on the dividend there. When you hear all the time from Juno, the fights over the dividend, the fights over the dividend, when you're looking at numbers like that, that's why the fights over the dividend, it's substantial money. Governor didn't put any increase in education. Legislature put $680 per student for a cost of $174 million. So they increased the base $680 per student. Anchorage was happy with that, but I think they would have been happy at around $1,000 a student. But $680, it was a gift, and so we were going along real well at that stage. Capital budget, $330 million. Legislature added to the gov's capital budget, which is very normal, $416. Now the governor, everything's fine. We're in a $90 million surplus, $1,300 dividend, off we go. And then the governor takes out his red pen and he vetoes the base student allocation, $87 million. So he takes half of the BSA. For Anchorage School District, that increase equated to $25 million. So they would have got $50 million, took half it away, $25 million. He took $30 million from the backfill of community assistance, or the old term was revenue sharing. And how that works is there's a 3-year rolling average. So you put the money in 1 year and then the average of that 3 years allows the community assistance fund to pay out. If you take a year's funding, now we're averaging 2 years worth. So he took that. That really impacts Anchorage, but it significantly impacts many of the rural villages who absolutely need that to operate their little communities. So remember, what we have in Juneau is 3-4 co-chairs of finance that are from rural areas. So we're sitting there with Donnie Olson and Richard Foster from Nome. We're sitting there with Lyman from Bethel. We're sitting there with Bryce Edgman. So we've got quite a few rural. You're probably going to see that money go back in under a supplemental.
I'm going to jump in briefly and say it's Neil Foster,
Oh, Representative Neil Foster. Oh, did I say?
his dad.
Oh, because
That's
I work.
awesome. You've been doing this for a while.
I worked for his dad for 10 years. So thank you very much, Representative Neil Foster. So we're hoping that goes in an early supplemental. UAA campus lost 20 million, 10 million school maintenance, ANZAC lost. Our Head Start lost 3.5 and tourism lost 2.5. The governor looked to put 200 million back. He wanted to take 200 million, so that's where most of his 200 million went. So on to the next slide. How did that affect Anchorage? Well, it affected us with the backfill on our community assistance. And then he did some individual vetoes in Anchorage. He took Lower Virgo Avenue emergency egress for $420. He took the Eagle River Cemetery for $1.5 million. He also did Birchwood and Hillside RSA drainage and ditches. He took them. Statewide, how did it impact us statewide? When you touch the mental health money or the crisis now or crisis care, that definitely impacts Anchorage. Or while it's a statewide program, it definitely impacts Anchorage. Head Start, $3 million. And of course, the BSA veto. So that was not probably great for us, but I think we can survive. Or not survive, but I think it was better than it looked like it was going to be for a while. So the next question is, did we have any wins? Yes, 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 yes. We had a big win, thanks to you all. As you remember, I think we didn't win a lot of friends the year before when we were able to get 200 million from Anchorage Port. We paid Anchorage Port, thanks to all your help and the Nome delegation with Nome. And I think Mia will be the first one to agree that your last resort is to put an amendment on the House floor and the Senate floor and roll the co-chairs of finance. We didn't have support. We did do that and had support from the groups on the members on the floor to do that. And I think it caused some hard feelings, I'll be honest, Mayor. I think that we did have some hard feelings left from that just because of the way it was done. Probably wouldn't been my finest hour that I'd say, but at the end of the day, I think you pay me to get what you want. So we heard from day one that money was going to be taken back. What we were sitting with was 100 million for match, 25 million we could spend straight away. And then 75 million had a delayed effective date. And the delayed effective date was July 1st, 2023. So they were going to take that money to help balance the budget. We had an Anchorage caucus. We had assembly members down. We had very, very strong support from the Anchorage caucus, probably the strongest I've seen. I know it came up several times and Anchorage pushed back hard. No, that was our money. We got it. You're not taking it. I think that was a real show that if Anchorage sticks together and is realistic about their objectives, I think Anchorage can be very, very strong moving forward because we've got some tough issues coming. But yes, thank you very much to the Assembly and the Mayor's Office and everybody for that. That was awesome. Let's have a look at how it looks for the future. This was just put out recently, revenue projections moving forward. This one here, baseline traditional revenue, oil, you'll see that. This one here is the POMV, percent of market value, that 5% that spins off the permanent fund, a black line and a dotted line. The dotted line is before the PFD. So that's how the budget would look in those years before the PFD. The solid line is if we pay a PFD, and it gives you an amount down here, how much we pay. So you'll see that, and these little yellow ones, not surprising, a new revenue. We're going to have to look to new revenue to pay a PFD or no PFD. You'll see in these outer years, we're in deficit again. So I think what we do know is this. We know that some tough choices are going to have to be made to keep the dividend or not keep the dividend. That's the first question. I think Alaskans, you all know, have become very supportive of the dividend. So how do they balance? This will be a tough fiscal year next year because you're going to look at a spending cap. The governor wants a spending cap. If we do a sales tax, the rural areas don't like a sales tax, but a 2% sales tax would create $1 billion. Income tax, I mean, all the taxes are on the table. And I think that the governor, as we saw, put out a sales tax, not an amount, but a sales tax. They want a basket of options. Of course, oil is definitely on the table, and the S Corp and C Corp tax structure is on the table too. But you're looking at having to get anywhere up to $1 billion in revenue. And so remember, if we don't pass this revenue in the next year or two, it takes several years for the agencies to implement. So we're back into the red days back there. We've got to get them established, set up, regs written. And so it's sort of a time that I think you're going to see the legislature have to address some really tough things. They did work on it, both sides. They almost got there on a couple of things, but just differences in regions and differences in who they represent. You know, the rural areas are very different to Anchorage. And so those sort of things happen. Everything was going along great. We kept our money. The budget wasn't too bad for us. And then we, of course, saw the vetoes. But then on the very last day of session, along comes a bill to set up a port authority with a public corporation. If you look at the structure of this port authority, it's very similar to the Alaska Railroad. It's an entity within the Department of Commerce with a independent and legal existence with quite a bit of autonomy. I think the devil is in the details on this one here. The members appointed, one by the Senate President, one member appointed by the Mayor. The Assembly has 3 appointments on that board, but one must be from a bargaining unit and one must have experience in domestic coastwise trade.
I'm going to jump in there briefly and say that this was quite a shock. I had heard about it coming, and we will take an opportunity to delve into the details, but it feels an awful lot like an act of eminent domain and a taking from the municipality. And so any conversation that the legislature wants to pursue down this road, it could go a number of ways, civilly or not, civilly to the courts maybe. With that said, the Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee would like to invite the sponsors to come to our committee in September so that they can present to us the case for why this is in the interest of the people of Anchorage. I understand their rationale for taking it for the people of the state of Alaska, but it's not going to be something that's done without some consideration to the 100-year investment by the people of Anchorage in the Port of Alaska. So I just want to put a marker on the table that this one could be a very interesting project.
Yes. Thank you, Member Constance. Always go to say Representative Member Constance. I was also surprised. I had heard it was coming. Our office had heard something was coming. But when you get to the last day of session, you don't think it's coming. And then all of a sudden, there it was. So it's a finance bill. I believe the person who had it drafted was Senator Lyman Hoffman. It'll have rural support just because they don't want increases. They want to have a say. So, I think this is one of those times where Anchorage caucus is probably going to have to hold very, very strong on this, because the leadership is rural in the House and Senate. So we do have members there that were great. We've had Bill Wielechowski, Senator Wielechowski, Kelly Merrick. We've had quite a few House and Senate, Julie Colomines, that have been real strong for us. So hoping that continues. We'll go on to legislation, blighted property and tax exemption. Senator Dunbar did a great job, and he got it almost over the finish line. And we all know that at the end of the day, there's some tug of wars, and Senate won't move House bills and House won't move Senate. This one should have gone, is ready to go. And of course, you understand, I think he's talked about Anchorage and blighted properties and the need to have some sort of control over people with blighted properties. So his bill has had a lot of support, should have passed, will probably pass early next session. State sales tax was introduced by Rep. Carpenter out of down in the Kenai area. It would raise, it was 2% if it was statewide. When you go into a sales tax, the interesting thing is then all the interest groups come. Is there a sales tax on cars? Is there on automobiles? What is the sales tax on? And so I think that'll have to be worked out as the process goes along. There is one, I put this on here on e-cigarettes, imposes a 25% tax on the retail sales, but it also increases the age to 21 that you can have. And if you're caught under the age of 18, you have to appear in court with your parents. And that's been something that Senator Gary Stevens has been very, very strong about. Electric assisted bicycles. You saw that one was vetoed the other day. I did talk to the governor, and he said he didn't want another bill on bicycles. If the municipality wants to do one, they can do one. Right now, the state has oversight. It's treated as a motor vehicle, but he didn't want to have, he just said it was a bill that wasn't necessary. I think you'll see that come back again next session. There might have been a little bit of tug of war on that one. Sometimes you just put it down and say.
Question for you. I think my question is, you suggest the governor stated that this is something the muni should take care of, but currently it's regulated as a motor vehicle.
Yes.
Is this then something that the muni can in fact regulate, or is this something that has not been delegated, because it's been regulated at the state? So that might be a Dean question. I'm not sure, or if it's a Wendy question, but if we have the authority, then we should consider it. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add that I'm aware of some legal perspective that, there needs to be a change to state statute to allow municipalities to regulate electric assisted bicycles. So we can't just do it without some change that authorizes municipalities to do so.
So it feels like maybe the governor needs a little bit more information on
Yes.
that question. Thank you.
I didn't put these in. I got them from Anna, and I really appreciate it. Anna, and a couple of to bring up to you. School funding, there's a bill out there to increase school funding, the base. When we talk about the base, every year there's one-time funding, and it's a battle over the amount. But the base is the amount we always start with. So there was a bill out there by House Education to Senate Education, Senator Wilson, to increase the base $1,000. So Anchorage would go from, I think, 58, 60 or something, $1,000 increase. Significant. And then you don't have to fight for the money every year. It's in statute. Past the Senate floor, Representative Ortiz had a $1,200 increase over on the House side. The House Finance Committee did not moved the bill, and they brought it down to $680 per student, dollars per student, and it was one time they added to the budget. So we're going to have to go back now and, work on, and there's so many pieces to that puzzle, and I think the biggest piece is if you put it in the formula, a large portion of the state's revenue now is in formula funding. So if it's not education, it's Medicaid and so now they have to look at what their revenue is, come back, because if you add this in, I think my guess is, I was talking to a couple of my colleagues, our guess is the Senate tries to force the House to do it. Now, remember, the House is more conservative, Republican-led, very conservative over in the House. The Senate is a coalition. And so I think you'll find the Senate probably tries to get the House to move it. Same thing with retirement benefits, going back to defined benefit. Senate Finance had several hearings, and this is a very complicated issue, as you know, because we have actuarials come in. And they've had two big presentations from actuarials trying to find out what the impact is. And again, it all depends on what sort of appetite the House has to increase revenue. The Senate and House have to increase revenue. So it's another work in progress. You asked, someone asked about election voter registration. That bill should have gone, Senate Bill 138. So right now, Senator Karasaki has a version. Representative Vance has a version. Hers is very conservative. She's also trying to work on getting rid of ranked choice voting. They're coming up with a compromise that everyone can live with. It'll be an agreement between both sides. So hopefully that will go. And it does with ballot curing. It does with how long names stay on the rolls. It does a lot to do with the actual voter and the voter rolls. Senator Clayman had a bill, and it was the bill to deal with, try and address the issue that faced Angela Harris here in Anchorage. And so the bill seeks to change the rule, how people are treated. They're accused of a crime but not competent to stand trial. So there's an involuntary commitment part in there where the state can do an involuntary commitment up to 2 years. And I think that bill there is currently in, goes to House Judiciary. It's a Senate bill, House Judiciary, and then Finance.
Okay. There's a question for you, Ms. Alto.
Thank you. Do you know how this bill relates to the one by Representative Josephson over in the House, how they're different? Because he also had a bill, seems very different than this. And I'm just kind of curious because one raises alarm bells for me and one is like, man, it could be okay.
I don't.
Okay.
And so I'll have to look into that. I can easily look into
Okay,
that.
thanks.
Thank you.
We talked about the blighted property, short-term rentals. That was a bill introduced by Representative Gray. It's currently in House Labor and Commerce. The bill would require Anchorage to get short-term rental owners to register and can only operate one short-term rental at a time. That's getting a lot of excitement, should I say? People upset. I think you're going to find entities like the Alaska Realtors and groups will come out because some people have done a business model with a bunch of short-term rentals. So I think that'll be sort of a very, a lot of public testimony on that one, I think. We talked about the port. So I have a copy here of, I have a copy of my presentation. We also have a printout, which I'll send you on. It's every tax measure that's introduced, what it does, and how much it would raise for revenue. I have heard, they said that they would probably be an October special session to deal with revenue because it's such a big issue that it takes up all the time at the assembly, at the legislative level, but I understand there's not the support to do that. So probably looking at session to have to do that.
Another question for you, Ms. Alto.
Thank you. In one of our handouts, we have the district-specific funding requests, in particular, the ones that are broken down by Senate and House. There were a lot of capital improvements there. I think in advance of the next legislative session, really like advice if this is a good way to go or not, because most of these didn't get funded. But what this also means for us is they didn't get considered for the bond. And now these projects could be delayed. And so really need to get a better sense. I mean, I appreciate the effort to try to do this, but if we're not likely to get them funded, we need to maybe be more strategic because some of these projects have been waiting and you don't want to delay the length of the project or make it so that they become worse and then need capital improvement. So that would be something really good to know. And frankly, we have to ask you to help us read the tea leaves a little bit because we will be doing our budget process in October and November. And so if we're going to be bonding, that's the time we'll really be talking about that, moving them through our capital project versus trying to say, hey, legislature, can you help us out with these?
Thank you very much. I totally agree. I think I was talking to my partner and Mayor Annette yesterday, and we're throwing around housing options. And it's great to come to the legislature and say, I need 25 million, I need 30 million, 50 million for housing. If they have no money, they don't have any money. So I said, maybe we sit down with AFHC, with Mental Health Trust, and the heads, and then someone from the Gov's office, either Tyson or Deputy Chief, and then we sit down with a couple of Anchorage legislators and just go through that moment where you throw ideas at the wall sort of thing, where you say, what if we had some incentivization for corporations to invest in housing for homelessness? What if? I mean, there's got to be something out there to create some sort of investment in homelessness other than a straight GF to the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely agree. But I was more concerned about the capital projects
okay.
on like roads, because that is something that we can do locally. And I think partly with the community assistance reductions over time, we're saying, hey, legislature, could you also, because it's a key piece to keeping the city running.
Yep.
So that's really where I agree with the other approach on the housing, 110%, but it's that advice on these specific road projects, because that feels really specific, which is great, something to champion. And if we don't get the funding, then they're delayed.
Okay, understand.
I note that Mr. Johnson has joined us in the room. And anyone else? Questions? So this is a good time for open conversation. Go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And this is a question not just for Wendy, but also we have members from the administration at the table as well. And just thinking, in addition to the asks that have been put on the table this year, just wanting to start the conversation about if we anticipate additional things, because, for example, I know the port's going to be a huge priority. It continues to be. And then, we know a lot of these issues on the table have been there for a long time, but I'm just curious if you guys do have any comments, or feel free to say that you guys are still working through it.
Thank you, Anna. And this is Mia Costello, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Mayor. I think in the conversation surrounding homelessness and the severity in Anchorage, I think it might be something we look at to increase the beds at API.
So I think a number of folks would argue that increasing the beds at API isn't going to actually make a remarkable difference in the context of homelessness. It will in the context of some critical behavioral health. And so we definitely want to have a talk about what our strategy is in making substantive requests related to homelessness specifically. And I think that the issue of API really ties tightly and nicely with the two bills that were described, Josephson and Clayman, relating to the Title 47 holds and those issues. And so that is part and parcel of the broader conversation, but we need to be really clear if we're making asks related to homelessness. API, they should be funding anyways. They have 75 beds. They cut it from 150. And they definitely need to operate at more than the 20 beds or so that they're operating. I have a question for you, Wendy, and Mr. Cross will go next. We do an annual legislative program.
Mhm.
What is the ideal time for you to receive a final definitive Anchorage legislative program for you to be able to be most effective with it?
Probably by the first week of the legislative session. Because most people now, after these years, walk around and they know that I'm from Anchorage. We go and see all the Anchorage legislators. We try and get the Anchorage caucus, and we visit everybody the first week or week and a half. And I get the same question time and time again. Have you got the book? Have you got your priorities? If I get them late January, early February, I think sometimes you all get calls asking, saying we haven't dropped off the list or the book. We don't have the book. So by the first week of session is optimum for us.
So not sooner.
Well, if I can have the legislation sooner, the priority legislation, yes, then we can get it drafted.
Right. So I think what that speaks to is the committee timelines. And I would say that the first week of session feels late to me.
Yes.
And so ideally we have a project list and maybe a program by December,
Yes.
right when the budget drops, or even
would be great.
slightly before when the budget drops, so that when the conversations heat up, they are informed by an actual publication, a book. Mr. Cross.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that we really need to emphasize the investment in substance misuse and treatment. I feel like we're behind the ball on that. And now that we're going to be opening up the Golden Lion, we desperately need to get that a treatment running out of that. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck with a large bill. And I believe that's 2025 that we need to have treatment. So, I mean, that's not much time if we're talking 18 months until, I'm not sure when in 2025, but
October
to get it
30th.
October. So, okay, a little over, a little over 2 years. But I mean, to get a functioning treatment center operating out of Golden Lion, I think is going to take all of that time, and to be able to get some some funds directed towards that so we can accelerate that offer, because not doing that is going to be a huge price to pay. Thank you.
Right. Next in the queue, I have Mr. Sultan and Ms. Zalatil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. First, if you could expand on the wildfire protection plan a little more elaborate. Zach and I are hillside, so that's probably our concern. And second, I hear a lot from constituents about our crimes or laws not having tough enough penalties, and basically people get a slap on the wrist and they're back out on the streets. Is there any talk around improving our civil or criminal penalties?
Member Schultz, I have not heard anything. I think once Senate Bill 91, there was such a pushback on that, and it was such, other than Matt Clayman, who's trying to make differences in small area. I mean, I think a lot of people agree something needs to be done, but nobody's willing to pick up that baton and run forward with it. So I have not heard anything on that. As far as wildfires, you're saying wildfire protection for the hillside?
It's one of your items on the 2023 legislative program, number 6 or so. Just want to, if you know any more details about what that entails.
No, I don't. So we'll get back to you on that, though, definitely.
I think next, Ms. Zalatil, then I have Mr. Martinez, Ms. Bradley.
Thank you. I want to explore a little bit from what you might know about the Crisis Now grant vetoes, because I hear the mayor's point of view around needing more psychiatric beds. I don't disagree. One of the great things with Crisis Now is crisis stabilization and crisis stabilization beds, which don't require certificate of needs, which are really hard to get in this state, and can kind of handle some of the short term up to 23 hours and then up to 7 days. And I know Senator Clayman, then Representative Clayman, had done a lot of work on that. So I'm kind of curious, where's the rationale in kind of cutting into that system and the development of that system by the governor? Is it around not believing we need more investments in mental health in the state, or is it that particular model, or do we just don't have that insight?
So I did talk to the governor about that specifically. He believes a lot of entities are receiving money, different groups getting money, either federally, state, through nonprofit, and his desire is to have a very coordinated effort. In other words, not this group gets some, that group gets some. So that was his thing. Now, when I originally talked to him, he had been told that there were quite a bit of money aside that hadn't been spent for behavioral health issues. We did clear that up. And so I think for him and probably his staff, we need to sit down and brief him on it in a format that he can, absorb all the information that we're giving him. I think, he's not really, he has really strong commissioners of Health and Social Services and relies on them, but we probably need to go to him and just sit down. And rather than, I can tell you that I find with him, with our governor now, to sit down, he loves to debate and talk. And so I think that might be, I'm sure he'd come if it was a very informal sit around talk. And a lot of his style, I think, is to tell him what you're there for and tell him what your solution is proposing. And then he thinks backwards from it. Because otherwise you give him all the information and he's so busy absorbing that information. He's definitely a problem solver. And I think homelessness, crisis now, behavioral health is a big issue to him. We just need to further educate him. I think that came because he does believe there's money out there.
Okay, thank you. And just so we all make the note, if we do put this in our legislative package, we need to talk about how we've already leveraged our local dollars in the mobile crisis team, which is the first step of Crisis Now. So I think that's really important because I think that shows we're already in the game, but we still need this additional infrastructure help. And I really like framing the behavioral health system as an infrastructure project, even though it's not actual capital, it's the kind of social infrastructure that pays off over time. Thanks.
All right, next I have in the queue, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to also lend my voice to getting a real clarity on our requests and focus area of mental health investments from the state, and also separate treatment resources, as Mr. Cross mentioned as well. I think those are critical areas for us. I often wonder about how we can force or compel the state to respond to the mental health crises, considering the hub of the state that we are. It's interesting that we'll talk about Port Authority, but the investments in human capital are lacking in these areas. And from the city's perspective, I hope that we really have a strong focus on making sure we request resources, getting an up-to-date story, and telling a better unified narrative of the needs of those types of investments. And just to go to Member Zaltel's point, when the city moved on investing in ourselves in the local alcohol sales tax, with dedication to some of these particular critical areas of the infrastructure, the continuum, as it were, I really think that helps to tell the story that Member Zaltel just mentioned, which I think is important as we make requests, that we are investing and that people understand that, but that we also have a clarity of the focus of who needs to come alongside of us and where they aren't today. On that front, I just have a question about any updates on SNAP backlog or what's happening there. There's food insecurity is important in our community across the state as well. And I hear folks there. And then I also just, if there's any comment that you could make on recent article about Head Start and the state losing federal dollars because of under-enrollment. And is there anything that we can learn from that or a position that we can help articulate? Thank you.
Recently, the Commissioner, Heidi, with Health and Social Services, noted that they're now back to a 3-week backlog on SNAP, that they were months and months and months changeover computer. They got sort of behind and it was really difficult to catch up. She did a briefing recently and said they thought they'd be caught up here in the next month or two, but they were 3 weeks behind with that. And Head Start, declining enrollment, federal funds don't come through. So I think that's what you're going to see, that they have a look at why they're declining enrollment. Why is the enrollment declining in the Head Start program? Are they going somewhere else? What's actually happening there? To address the problem, they've got to figure out what's causing the problem. I think it was a shock to see that there was a decline in Head Start. I don't know about anyone else, but I thought there was a waiting list.
To follow up on that, yeah, and it would be interesting. I don't think I saw in the article about where. I thought it was a statewide
It is.
conversation, right? But it would be interesting to understand the difference in Anchorage, because my sense is that there is a need. There has been a waiting list here, and that difference between where the needs are and where the lack of enrollment is might also speak to just making sure that we have a clearer understanding of the funding that we're entitled to through the state formula as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple comments and then a question. First, on the point of having meetings with the governor, others, certainly that's something that we are interested in as well. And it can certainly be in informal settings. Obviously, you know, unlike the legislature, we are subject to the Open Meetings Act, which just requires that the body do its business in public, which is, you know, certainly a good value for us to hold, but does mean that it can be more difficult to have those more informal conversations. So just as an example, we've already scheduled a meeting with the Anchorage caucus for late August. And that will not be an open meeting, but just kind of an informal introduction opportunity that a few of us will participate in. But just to say that we are open to that and happy to do that. So if you're able to help
Good,
facilitate that.
That'd be great.
This,
Quickly, Ms. Brawley, if I
Yes.
might, just a note of process, that won't be a function of the legislative committee. That won't be a function of the assembly. That will be a function of members working in a task force style separate from the committee process.
yeah, thank you for clarifying that. But also we also want to facilitate opportunities for individual members to have those opportunities as well. The second point is, again, just going back to what Member Zalatel brought up, leveraging funds.
Mhm.
I know we're all aware of the importance of that, but two examples come to mind. I know there's a lot of opportunities we could expand Merrill Field, for example, and those usually require either a state or a local match. And so things like that really, you know, but putting in that maybe not small, but, you know, one-time investment can really help us get a lot done. And then similarly, working with private funders, you know, our ability as a city to put in money toward these important projects as well as state money really gets things off the ground. This morning, we got to celebrate the, not quite the full opening, but the progress made on the Barrett Inn, which is, you know, privately owned, but has benefited from public funding. So that's just another example and good stories we can tell at the local level. So my question then is, this is really for all members thinking about process. One of the goals I have for the legislative committee is, you know, we have certain work to do. And of course, we have a lot of city business to take care of. So we can't focus all of our time on legislative issues. But I really want to make sure that we're facilitating engagement with our legislative partners effectively. And so I wonder, what guidance or advice do you have in terms of the committee as a whole, in terms of our process, so the committee as a whole and individual members, for example, when and how is it most useful for folks to go down and engage during session, for example, or, you know, now during the interim? And I'm thinking not just about the citywide priorities, but also individual members thinking about your district level priorities and being able to advocate for those.
Thank you, Member Burley. I think we've now set up where in session, it's usually February, we do a big lunch over at our office, very informal, bring the legislators over. And we've had a really good turnout, the Anchorage caucus. We always do a dinner that night. We try and make it informal, and it's a nice place we have dinner, but and I think last year, anybody who was at it, I think every legislator except two came from Anchorage. They've got very used to that. And it allows you to sit and talk to them, try and do make it short, a presentation on what the priorities are and that. So the one thing that I find that they tend to do is look for the priority. What's Anchorage? What's your must-have? You all know, of course, the rural areas have one big must-have or two big must-haves. That, you know, because there's only one representative for those areas. So they have one big one and they go for it and they push it hard. Anchorage over the years has tended to come in with numerous ones, which allows legislators to go, when you make up your mind, come back and see us. So with the port, it was very strong the last couple of years. Port. I think if it's homelessness, we just have to meet with them, make it real clear. But I think the other thing to do is we have to figure out a way to make them help us with the solution. Because not the easy answer, the answer they don't want to say, but the answer that's easier for them to say is, sorry, there's no money. And if there's no money, there's no money. So looking at the revenue, one thing I didn't bring up, I wanted to, and I just thought of it a while ago. Remember the governor's carbon tax, carbon credits bill passed. That'll be several years setting up, but that will provide anywhere from 200 million up to $1 billion, depending on how much how much carbon credits are sold. So that's a revenue stream. But I'm thinking there's got to be ways. Remember the education tax credit they passed years ago to try and get higher education credits? That if we could sit with some legislators and just come up with some ideas, got to fix homelessness, number one priority. What can happen here? Is there laws we need changed? Is there funding that could be available in another form? If they're passing new revenues, can we get some set aside on the new revenues for homelessness? What's available other than just going for the GF? That would be my recommendation there. Just sort of brainstorm with them.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Ross.
Hi, Claire Ross. I'm staff to the Assembly, and I do some of the wrangling with the Assembly members to help coordinate the outreach to Juneau. And so my question is adding on to this in a capacity question. It felt a little overwhelming. We had so many priorities last year to pick. And so I'm wondering what kind of your capacity is for how many priorities we can give you that you can effectively work on. And then thinking about how to divide up our work. A lot of these things maybe don't need to be an assembly-wide priority, but like Mr. Salt brought up the wildfire protection plan, maybe we come up with a process for Mr. Salt and Mr. Johnson to really focus on that one so that we're not using your capacity for it, but still working on it. So just kind of wondering what you think about capacity and how we can divide up the labor next session.
I think that's a really good idea, Claire, because they look at the books. And last year, the books were very well done, and the year before, because you gave us the main priorities, I think 6 or 7 of them, and then you broke all the other requests down per district. So they didn't have to read through an entire book. They went straight to their district and had a look what the assemblies need were. That works real well. As Heather and I go around, if I'm visiting with Senator Wielechowski, I go to his district page and we talk about that. That's very helpful, because if that's going to go in, it's probably going to be up to him. On your Anchorage-wide projects, there are 2 big ones there. There's support and housing. So, you're going to have, I have some members that say absolutely positively got to have that port money, Wendy. Then I have other ones say the port can wait, Wendy, I've got to have homelessness. And I'm like, well, I need you all to get on the same page. And I think that's sort of a reason to sit down and look for opportunities. Like the question will be, Matsu-Port. I'm going to guess Matsu-Port's going to move here soon. I hear rumors that something may happen there. Nome may have to come back in for some money because escalating costs, all of that, they have a match for theirs. So with the port, I always look for opportunities. Otherwise, it takes all of Anchorage capacity to do something like that. We won't get anything else. That's it. And so I always look for opportunities. So housing, I think we've got to get more creative on housing, to be honest.
All right. So I would note that we have roughly 5 minutes, maybe 8 left in this work session. And Ms. Zalato.
Thank you. So I think that you raising things other than just money is a really great opportunity for us. At the event we were at, there's $85 million notice of funding opportunity for HUD right now for technical assistance to address housing statewide, community-wide, and it's for the technical assistance, but the minimum award is $1 million. And that's really to examine policies that get in the way of housing. And so some of it might be we can help ourselves a little bit. The other is, when it comes to housing, we need the legislature if we want to have any additional tax credits here. And one I've been speaking actually with Representative Gray about with the short-term rental bill is, what if we had a $10,000 long-term rental tax exemption for property taxes? Something to try to incentivize long-term rentals. But that's something perhaps we could be asking the legislature to do. It'd be up to local jurisdictions to implement it if it made sense for them, but it's not money. It's actually our money that we want to be able to put in, our skin in the game to say, yeah, we really want to work on this long-term housing or this housing crisis, but we will need their help because they're the ones who have to authorize those tools as available to us. So if you think those types of things, I mean, we're really going to look to you to the kind of tools that you think would be most effective so that we can, talk amongst ourselves and how those would intersect with our own policies and how our government works.
Thank you. I think that's a great idea. I'd like to have several members sit down informally with AFHC. Brian Butcher's been there forever and a day. Ike went over there, who was the ledge director for the governor. And then they're very well versed. And then they have Ivy, that she was chief of staff to Natasha. She's now doing infrastructure and federal money. And maybe we could just sit down in a session and learn from them, throw out what we'd like and say what federal money, what federal opportunities, what match, what anything's out there that we could, capitalize on. A good point though, I think.
And I'll jump in there and say that notification of funding available from HUD today was specifically, as Ms. Alatel said, for barriers to construction like zoning practices and other things, policy changes. And so this one might be one that we contemplate in the branch as an application if we don't find an application moving forward on the executive side, because it specifically addresses legislative policies. And so that announcement was today. Claire, probably we want to have a conversation about reviewing the opportunity with council, because they might have a different opinion on if we're even capable of applying. So relative to the administration. So anyone else? Ms. Braga?
I just was thinking about Mr. Cross's comments on Golden Lion and treatment. And I worked at API years ago when it was 185 beds. There's not less people who have mental health needs. So getting more beds in API is huge. But the other thing is compelling people to get treatment. With the Golden Lion drug treatment, I was really surprised when Clitheroe said they had 12 beds available. If there's 12 detox beds, why aren't they being used? So we have to be able to compel people to get the help, and I'm not sure how we do that. So
I'll speak briefly. In my private life, I work for a treatment provider, and the issues that we faced in 2018, 2019, when the consent decree was signed, we had a different environment. We had a different world, and the need for treatment was very pronounced at that time because Medicaid hadn't been expanded and we didn't have the waiver in place. And so now what we have across the state is an exceptional amount of treatment beds and providers available, excess to the need that is presenting for treatment. And so I think your point you're making about how to motivate people to treatment is a very important question, because it has in fact fallen away. Judges don't have the right to sentence someone for 6 months for a petty crime, which they used to do in the past. And I'm not saying that's ideal, but they used to then require treatment in lieu of sentencing. But if they can't sentence someone, then they can't require them to go to treatment. And so there is something there, but the current paradigm isn't the heavy hand, it's the motivating tactic, how to motivate someone to get to treatment. And so different than the Title 47 question, which is actually seizing somebody's rights from them under color of law because they have demonstrated they are a harm to themselves or society. And so we have to be really clear in that, and that is the role of the API conversation. I just want to make sure that while people recognize it is associated to homelessness, it isn't the homelessness issue. It's a behavioral health care issue very specifically. And all of these complex issues wrap around in our community to demonstrate what we face today, but they're very distinct issues. So Wendy, I'm going to provide you now 3 minutes if you want to close and provide a kind of summary and what your thoughts are and where we should be going, how we should be preparing, et cetera. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Constance. I'd like to first of all thank the Assembly. Your input, your calls, I know that several of you, Member Constance, I call and I say, I think I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that. Can you please call? You have strong relationships with individual representative and legislators. Times with me, I can find it out, but then if it's not going to be the answer I want, they probably won't tell me. When you call, they will. And so I've really appreciated that. I don't think without your help, we could have stayed as strong as we did. with and that's the mayor and the administration as well. But with everybody, the Anchorage port money may have been in jeopardy. I mean, I was worried going into session. So thank you. You held really strong on that, and you're coming down, and your support was great. I think the biggest thing I try and do each year is say, having done this with Anchorage for years, we have a certain amount of the state's population. We should be getting that percentage of the budget. Now, I understand rural areas need more in their roads and their infrastructure and their schools, that sort of thing. But in the capital budget, I've always sort of believed that Anchorage should be getting their share. So when I tally it up, that's my biggest concern. And I think as they put together, we have members in leadership, as they put it together, they always have to be remembering that, yes, this is needed and this is needed and this is needed, but Anchorage has a population that is significant, half the state's population. And so when they're only getting like 17% or 18% of the capital budget, makes it very, very difficult. So I just think keeping the Anchorage caucus close, because when they're strong, they're very strong. They sort of get together and make a decision that they're not going to move, or they're not going to do this, or they're going to pass that, and they stay very strong for Anchorage. So I think that's the biggest key that I would advise you. Just let's try and, when you come down, we'll have the dinners, we'll have the lunch, we'll meet with them all. But thanks very much all the times I call you up and say, help, help.
Well, thank you. And I would note for the record, Mr. Rivera joined us a while ago, so he was in attendance at this meeting. I didn't notice him come in. And thank you, everybody, for your good questions. And Ms. Chamberlain, thank you for your representation. Look forward to much more assertive participation by this body.
Thank you very much. And feel free to call me anytime. You all have my numbers. Call me anytime, 24/7. I'm available.
And we're going to reconvene at 15 after for our next work session rather than 10. Thank you, everybody.
Very much.